He can't believe it at first, as you wouldn't, really. And he questions his friends quite rightly, thinking that they're playing some kind of elaborate joke or game with him, really. He doesn't check the date, but it could easily be an April Fool thing. It's not April, so it doesn't come up. But he then goes to Google, obviously, because where do you go these days? To Google, to God, the equivalent of God, to find out, is this true? And of course, there's nothing on Google. And the fact that there's nothing on Google, provided he hasn't mistyped it, and he doubles back on that, means that there's something here that's seriously changed, really. So he goes to his record collection. There appears to be no evidence anywhere of them at all. So obviously one of the big challenges for him, as it would be for anybody, and you can put yourself through this exercise easily, is think, wow, could I remember more than a few lines? How would you go about trying to render all the verses of a particular song, really? Not just the chorus. The chorus you can probably depend on, but the verses, how would you get them back? So there's kind of elaborate sequences of him trying to summon up the knowledge of where he's got phrases, as indeed we all would have. You carry phrases, I think, easily, but the sense of it, and often you realise when with some of your favourite songs, you misremember the lyrics anyway, because you kind of you sort of fill in bits that aren't absolutely clear in the expression of the singer. You kind of suit yourself with them, and so you often learn them wrong anyway. But he has to try and find, which he does through a series of post-it notes. He has to try and remember, recall, and record as he picks them up, as he begins to gather all the bits together again, as many Beatles songs as he can. There's a connection, really, with him and the songs where he's both utterly respectful and yet free with them as well. It's his voice, and it's him. It's his version. It's not some entertaining karaoke version that tries to be clever, or it's not some rethink of them. It's not some reworking even, but they're fresh. You feel like you're hearing the song afresh from him. And that was from when he first came in, and we did a bit of acting first. Did we? Oh, did we sing the song first? Oh no, I think he sang USSR first. And as soon as he sang it, I knew. You have one of those moments in casting. I thought, I don't know how I'm going to cast him, because there were other people who were probably more obvious candidates for it. But I knew then. I thought, that's him. It was a very interesting sort of I don't know, like a kind of like an X-ray of the idea, because obviously he's been through that movement in his career where he goes from being a singer-songwriter playing pubs in Suffolk and Norfolk and just locally, and then being catapulted into incredible, unbelievable success and fame and all that kind of stuff, and with a body of songs that has taken him there. I regard Richard as he's Britain's poet laureate of romance and comedy, and I've always been in awe of his devotion to that intersection of romance and comedy. Really, it's a beautiful thing.
Whenever anyone asks me what I'm doing at the moment, and I say, I'm doing this film, you can tell. I think the great thing about it is you can tell them in 14 seconds what the film's about, and they're instantly interested. You just say, oh, someone gets hit in the head and wakes up, and the Beatles never existed, so he becomes the biggest artist in the world singing Beatles songs, and they're like, that sounds like a great concept for a film. Yeah, and it really is. And I think Himesh is playing it brilliantly. It's just the whole time he's just kind of like, will I get found out? And yeah, it's I think it's going to be really good. It's like one of those things where, like, Danny has not really done a film that I've watched that I didn't like, and same for Richard. So like, I think the pairing it's a very weird pairing. I would never expect a Richard Curtis script to be directed by Danny Boyle, which is why I think it works. I mean, the Beatles are just kind of ever present. I've always, like, everyone grew up with the Beatles, and like, even if like you'll meet musicians nowadays that will be like, oh no, I'm not influenced by the Beatles, I'm not a fan, but like music that they have been influenced by was influenced by the Beatles. So it's like it's from this kind of, the Beatles are the melting pot that everyone kind of in popular music has taken ideas from. The moment I met Himesh, I was like, this is such a good casting, because he's kind of got, when he turns into character, he's kind of got this expression that is just perfect for the film. So I was like, okay, he's well cast, but at some point, you know, he's gonna have to sing and stuff. And then I heard him sing Long and Winding Road when we were in rehearsals, and I was like, wow, like, he can really sing, he can really play, but it's like, it's not robotic. It doesn't sound trained. It sounds like there's heart in it, which is, I think, difficult to get.
Jack gets hit by a bus and wakes up miraculously alive, generally okay. He's lost some teeth, he's had his beard shaved off, and he soon realises that he's the only person in the world, seemingly, who can remember the Beatles. He realises he's living in a world where the Beatles never existed. But for him they did. And so then he's left with a conundrum of what does he do? In a way, I have to remind myself that I've worked with Ed Sheeran, because he was just like any other actor, really. He never made you feel like you should be aware of who he is and what he does, which I think is really quite amazing, because he's probably the biggest pop star on the planet right now. It's been so fun to learn some of the best songs ever written, make them our own in some way, and just get to play around with a band that we got together, and then get to play Wembley Stadium and 6,000 people on Galston Beach, and just the most crazy situations in which I get to do this thing that I've kind of always wanted to do, really, which was play music in front of people. There is some magic to their music. I've spent 4 months now playing these songs over and over and over and over again, rehearsing them and then doing take after take. And I'm not tired of any of them. There's something about them that just, you don't get bored of it. If I wasn't in this film, I would absolutely go and watch this film, because it's directed by Danny Boyle, it's written by Richard Curtis, and it's about the Beatles. I mean, there's not much more you want from a British movie, is there?
I think Himesh has like an incredible amount of integrity, just naturally, just standardly, which helps, I think, a lot with the kind of the idea of being like, I just feel like I feel bad about, gradually feeling bad about stealing these songs. And I think, and also his voice is, personally, I think one of the best. I could listen to him singing all day, to be honest, because I think he's just got an incredible voice. There's no one who's had more of an influence on comedy, and that's such a thing to be able to say about someone. I mean, you can't think of anyone who's had more of a influence on comedy in this country, and lots of other things, but to say that number one person, I mean, I can't think of anybody else. And I think if you asked anybody, when you look at all the stuff he's done, I mean, he's done more things than I even realise now, looking at it, I'm like, oh, you did that as well? And yeah, he's just a machine in making these things, man. But this one, I think, because he's a fan of the Beatles personally, maybe it has hopefully a little more like magic dust chucked in. because he's also here all the time, you know. And watching those two work together has been quite special. I think that's quite a unique thing that doesn't happen much.
So Jack has discovered that he alone knows the Beatles catalog suddenly in this universe. And he passes the songs off as his own. No one is aware of this, of course, except for he himself. And so Deborah believes that these are his songs, and he has, by himself, produced the greatest compilation of music ever produced, and she sees dollar signs, and she knows just what a boon he is, and she tries to milk him for all he's worth. My agent sent me the script and said, there's a part, it's an agent. I said, yes. I always wanted to play an agent. I happen to love all of my agents very much, and we're very close. But I find it a fascinating job. And I read the script, and I thought, oh my God, this is the greatest script I've ever read. And I still believe that it is the greatest script I ever read. Who wrote this? Oh, sure, it's Richard Curtis. Who's directing it? Oh, sure, it's Danny Boyle, you know. And then I was clawing at the opportunity. I made a bald, graceless grab at this opportunity because, oh my gosh, it's the greatest idea of a movie I've ever heard, greatest execution of a script I've ever seen, and a director who is completely unique and completely incredible. So, yeah, I wanted to be a part of it. In this film, an ordinary man who has been a struggling musician for his adult life discovers suddenly that he's the only person in the world who knows the entire Beatles catalog. And as fate would have it, begins to play these songs because they deserve to be played. And he gets swept up in a collision course with fame and stardom because the songs are just so damn good, as we all know. And for me, as a lifelong, insane, diehard Beatles fan, I think it's a very poignant notion that the world would be a poorer place without these pieces of art. And there are so few pieces of art that you can say that of. But to imagine the world without the Beatles catalog is like imagining a world without, you know, a peacock or a bird of paradise or something, or a rainbow. It's like we'd survive, but it would be less colorful and less poignant. And I think there's something so beautiful about that. Richard Curtis has become one of my favorite people in the whole world, and he's so funny and like really, really funny. And his movies are hilarious as well, but they are grounded in the most heart and romanticism and kindness and celebration of human joy and connection in the world, which is what has made them so not only popular when they arrive, but so lasting. Danny Boyle has also made some of my favorite movies and is one of the most intense, passionate, brilliant guys I've ever seen. And the way that he chooses to shoot something and set up the angles of the cameras is sort of like the last thing you'd think of, and it's the best thing that could be thought of. The way that the movies are so visual, and he's developed this like visual language that just like ratchets up the story so much. He's not just pointing, you know, cross shooting some dialogue and doing a wide shot. It's this amazing way of seeing the scene and seeing the world that I think adds a whole other dimension to the story and so augments it. And it's such an exciting pairing of the two of them.
So in this scene, our hero Jack is kind of being walked through the marketing process of the creation of his album, and he has some song ideas of his own, which to us makes sense, to the world makes sense, because the hits from the Beatles, you know what I mean, like Abbey Road, the White Album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. These are all real, titles. And so my character as the head of marketing is deciding to come up with some ideas of our own. Kind of, I don't want to say shitting on his ideas, but we're kind of dismissing his ideas a little bit because we just don't think that they'll work. And so we had some variations on the album. And, you put a guy like Jack, who's a bit meek and kind of to himself and understated, and you put him in a room full of obnoxious Los Angeles marketing gurus, if you will, and the comedy will automatically be there without you don't even have to say any lines. The scene itself is just really funny and awkward. This is my first project working with Danny, and he's great. I mean, the amount of freedom that he allows you to have on screen is great. You try stuff. He lets you know if he likes it, if he doesn't like it. You just go ahead and play. And the cool thing about him is that he trusts your judgment. And I made fun of him because he does this thing where he'll walk up to you very aggressively after a take as if he has a note, and he doesn't. He just walks up to you and just stands there. I'm like, you can't do that shit to me, man, because I'm having a panic attack. I'm thinking you're going to tell me my performance is shitty and you're going to fire me. But that's not the case at all. So it's been so great working with him. And a lot of his shots, I noticed are just dope shots that a lot of people don't get. And so it's been really cool watching the process and trying to look at certain takes and stuff like that to see how awesome it looks. So far, so good.
Ellie is a teacher. She lives in Suffolk in Lowestoft, and she is also, her passion really is to be Jack Malik, her best friend's manager / roadie / driver / everything. She basically organizes and books his life as a musician. She's totally dedicated to him. So she's pretty busy all the time, and Jack is her best friend as of for their whole lives, and she is very much in love with him. I think what Danny Boyle's been so brilliant is capturing is that feeling of the early Beatles, of that kind of them running around and the joke and the humor and the kind of that spark that they had, which the whole world just fell in love with, that Beatle fever. It was, it's so wonderful for us. And there's me, Alex, and Himesh. Alex, who plays Gavin, our kind of producer in the studio, when we're getting to listen to the songs and record the songs and do the hand clap and have the tambourine and feel like we were the Beatles creating this music. It was just one of the best days filming I've ever had. It was so much fun. I've just been watching Himesh in awe, really, because there's something about him that is so, I remember when I met Danny Boyle and we were doing the scenes, and I said, well, who's going to be Jack Malik? And he was like, I can't say yet, but his eyes kind of lit up and he was like, I've found someone and he is just brilliant. And I could see, and he couldn't say who, and I was like, oh my, and then working with Himesh in rehearsals and stuff and seeing, it was like he is Jack. He has this kind of, he's sort of lets the music come out through him in such a pure, honest way, and his voice is so incredible, and it really does sound like that early Beatles sound. Like you could hear his voice would harmonize in into the Beatles perfectly. It's an amazing problem. You do think, like, what would you do if you had that knowledge? You would want to give it out to the world. You would want, otherwise there would be no Beatles. And imagine trying to remember the songs. That's what I think will connect to an audience everywhere worldwide, because you kind of buy into that idea of, oh, if you were the only person, you were trying to remember all those songs. And it's just like such a brilliant concept. To be in a film he's written, to be around him every single day, and to become, friends with this person who I just think is such a genius in his writing, and how he weaves stories together and creates characters and makes the audience root and for the people in the film and long for to be in the film, and to just and captures what's like true and good and hopeful about life.
The more we looked into the music and talked about it, the more you realise the more you're reminded rather, how internationally spanning and how cross-generational this music is. People stood outside Abbey Road Studios are 80-year-old Chelsea pensioners and 16-year-old Japanese schoolgirls, and you can just see how the world was interested, has always been interested, and will still be interested in this evergreen and diverse music from this iconic band. I guess in terms of Jack's journey, he finds himself with a kind of golden ticket to the life and the career that he'd always hoped for himself and had never quite achieved. And his initial interaction with that is excitement, is possibility, is great, the world is my oyster. And through a kind of slightly fractious beginning, he is actually able to realise that and to go on the adventure that he hoped, which is talk shows and sell-out gigs and the possibility of platinum selling albums. But I think the more fame he's given and the more opportunity he's given, he's learning two things. He's getting further and further away from the person who he was and his roots and the potential of love, familial love, or kind of being with the person who he's supposed to have been with this whole time. But there's also the idea that he's a fake, he's a fraud, and there's a fear of people discovering the truth behind what's going on. And I think the complexity of the journey that Jack's character is going on is a kind of roll-up of both of those things. It's losing sight of himself, and it's drowning in the stress and the fear of discovery, and also the guilt of knowing that the rightful owners of those songs aren't getting the credit that they deserve. Hopefully the film will do a couple of things. It will let lifelong fans of the Beatles continue to be lifelong fans. It will remind people who've always enjoyed them that they should go back and listen to them. And hopefully it'll let people know who haven't previously listened to the music or really engaged with it, that it's all out there and that it's worth discovering.
I really loved his take on the movie, which was sort of more energetic, more emotional. And I suppose those are the two things that he's kept doing, apart from the fact that he's, directs it infinitely better than I would have done. And every day is a joy just watching him at work and seeing how he sees a scene and then thinks of three things to happen in the scene, which, no usual director would do. It's been a sort of great balance, I think, between my slightly leisurely emotionality, I would say, and his sort of much more passionate and energetic emotion. But we've got on very well. I thought it might be complicated. I've had complicated with relationships with directors before. And then suddenly, after 3 weeks had gone by, I thought, oh, it's not. We refer to Himesh as the hardest working man in show business, and he certainly has been in pretty well every shot of every day of this film. And there are two things which I particularly would compliment. One is actually, as the days have gone by, he's found a way of being ever more himself on camera. You know, we sort of picked him because of the man that he is, even though there's obviously a huge amount of acting. But he actually, and I think this was the mixture between him and Danny, he became more confident, more delightful, more himself every day. So that was great. And secondly, you know, he's young and he's keen, which means that on days, and there have been 15 of them where he had to sing songs, he did them 40 times. You know, it would have been so easy to say, well, look, these are the 5 where you have to sing the song properly, and then after that we'll kind of have to edit the tracks and it'll be a bit complicated, and why don't you just do half the song? No way, he just did every song in full every time as best he could, so that when the editing happens, you've actually got brilliant and perfect takes in every sort of shape and size. I can't speak too highly of him. The truth of the matter is that in some ways this film is about Ed, insofar as it's an Ed who hasn't succeeded. Ed comes from Suffolk. Ed has, in the end, is engaged to a girl he was at school with, which is the same story as Himesh. And Ed could have not been a success, and Ed is the world's most successful artist at the moment. So there are all sorts of ingredients from Ed's life that were in my head, because we've known him for years, up here when I was writing the film. And so, in fact, just one day we were up here with Danny, and Ed came over for supper, and Danny said, you should be in the film. That should be the person who's the famous person who finds our not famous person and helps him on his way. So it's quite a sweet thing that Ed is acting in the film brilliantly, very funny, and very true as well, in a film which is sort of about him. Lily has enormous joy. She's actually a radiant person. Today she attended a gig by my son, and she was the only person jumping up and down of the whole crowd. So she has a unquenchable joy, and she has a genuine sort of emotionality, which means there are so many scenes where a normal actress would have just seemed to be a bit sad or engaged, and you can just sort of tell that her whole heart is vibrating and at risk. And those two qualities are an amazing thing to work with, because then, in fact, at both ends of my work, really, sort of joy and humour and, you know, a bit of sadness and heartbreak. In a way, the Beatles is where my sort of emotional and artistic life began. I was completely obsessed by them. I had 2 older sisters who bought their records early. So at the age of 7, I was standing outside the Foresta Hotel in Sweden where we were living, waiting for the Beatles to come out onto the balcony. So I've been listening to and loving their music all my life. And I feel as though, as unhumble as it is and ridiculous it is to say, but I've always been trying to reproduce some of the things I heard in their music, which was joy and emotion in the context of joy. So when they're miserable, there's still something uplifting about it. So, you know, if I could ever do anything that made people feel that strange mixture of sort of joy and depth, that's what I've been trying for. Obviously, I'll never produce anything as wonderful as 113 of their songs. But they have been my lifelong inspiration. I didn't listen to the Beatles much while I was writing the film, because the idea is meant to be he's got no access, as it were, to iTunes. So what would be the first song that he would play? What would he remember? Danny's been doing this interesting experiment, saying to people he meets, you know, name 20 Beatles songs, and often people get stuck like at 12, because sort of in the panic and thinking, and what are the other ones, and the names of the, you know, there isn't a song called Revolver, there isn't a song called Beatles for Sale. So, and then if you can remember the names of the songs, what the hell are the words? So it was quite odd, because I was absolutely thinking about the Beatles all the time when I was writing it, but not listening to the Beatles very much, because I didn't want to remember the words. We had to cast some, you know, ridiculous pop star to play a ridiculous pop star, and who should pop into my mind but
Chris Martin. Which is 100% true. A film based on me, and he wanted Chris Martin to play the musical boy.
Well, it's Chris. It's just the physique.
And then you
Chris
said,
has just got the physique.
I went round for dinner, and he said, Chris Martin can't do it. Do you think Harry Styles would do it? And I'm just kind of looking at him
promise
being
you,
like,
that's like a fantasy.
you definitely said that. And I was like, Richard,
But I was teasing you by that point.
it's based in Suffolk.
Yeah.
About a boy that
Yeah.
was playing Halesworth Gig in the
Yeah.
Park and stuff.
I know.
And there's a musician in it who's from Suffolk.
Yeah. Well, the guy from The Darkness. One of the great things about what Himesh is doing is you sort of see the songs through his performance, don't you? They're allowed to speak. It's not like some guy saying, I'm going to wrangle this into a new kind of act, into a new kind of music. This is all about me. It's all about the sort of prettiness and simple beauty of the tunes.
Yeah, I just think he does a great job of it. And the whole film feels... There was a moment where he did The Long and Winding Road, where we were doing like a songwriting competition. And the first time he did it, I remembered like getting proper like goosebumps, hair standing up, being like, this is going to be a really special film. You know, and that's largely down to Danny's directing and not Richard's screenwriting. So
Yeah, I know that.
I didn't really know what to expect from Danny because he's such a successful director who's done like all sorts of shapes and sizes as films, and I'm not. I mean, bar the odd cameo in Home and Away and Game of Thrones.
I mean, it really was odd.
I liked it, but bar them, I haven't really acted ever, so I didn't know walking into this situation whether I would get sort of berated by a very top director. But he has such a way of talking to people, and he's always so friendly about like even if I've done something wrong, he'll say that I've done it wrong in such a friendly way and make you feel good about yourself, which I think is a very rare talent in someone in his position.
He's the loyalist person that I've ever worked with, and he's become a very good friend because of that. He has huge integrity, and he chooses in his work to see and search out for the good things in life, about relationships, about the good things in your friends and people, and to depict them on screen. And all of his work in some way has done that, and it's all fallen under this trope of being a romantic comedy. Because the other thing that he is he's a very, very funny guy, and that he finds the joke and the one-liner in any situation. One of the things that was required for the finale of our movie was a big stadium concert, and that we were lucky enough that Ed was doing a tour of Britain through last summer. And so we negotiated with him and his team to be able to go and film not him but the crowds in his concerts, and so a lot of the production resources actually went into that because it was quite a big number to do. And so we went to, I think, 3 nights at Wembley and 2 nights in Cardiff, where we shot crowds and comings and goings at his concerts as if it was for our main actor Jack Malik's concert. When Richard was writing this film, he has a great personal affection for Suffolk, as he's got a house up there, his family spend all of their holidays up there, and he very much felt that he'd wanted to make it as culturally specific to Suffolk and as geographically specific to Suffolk as he possibly could. I was all for that because actually I've got quite a lot of family who come from Suffolk as well, and it's a beautiful and very seductive part of the world. It's very flat. It's very varied because there are some very idyllic spots, but there are also some sort of edgier spots, particularly on the coast and Gorleston.